From SBI's Executive Briefing Center in Dallas, Texas, the most watched and listened to content in B2B sales and marketing, it's the SBI Podcast with your host, Matt Shares.
Hey everybody, welcome to SBI TV. I'm Matt Shares, the CEO of SBI. And on today's show, Chethan Sharma, who leads our CEO practice and also our global pricing practice, is going to join me as we talk a little bit about how market-leading CEOs not only connect the corporate strategy to revenue growth strategy, but do it in a pragmatic way to get ready for 2021. What Chethan and I are going to cover today is there's three camps of CEOs that we've seen. Chethan's going to talk a little bit about the difference between those as people are getting ready for 2021. Then we're going to talk about a couple things relative to the big trends that we're seeing. And we're going to finish off around a couple of trends that we believe will be helpful as you take them into your planning season. So, Chethan, first off, good to see you.
Likewise, Matt.
I wish we were able to be face-to-face, but you have an equally effective real Zoom background because those are actually real books as opposed to just a fancy background. So that's very, very good.
That is correct, yes.
All right. So, Chethan, maybe as a way of getting started and knowing that you spend the lion's share of your time working with the CEO and then also leading our pricing practice, I thought it would be interesting to talk about the three camps of CEOs and executive teams that our research showed. Because over the past 6 months, you and I have observed there's three very different types of groups, and it's cascading its way into 2021 planning. So maybe with that as a lead, and I'll let you share with the audience what we're seeing and how they might think about that and themselves identifying in one of those three camps.
Sure, Matt. In terms of the three camps that in our research has identified, the first one is what we would term as survivors. So these are folks who've been severely impacted by the crisis that's ongoing, and essentially they're required to play defense. So people like we've met with software companies that cater to the travel industry or the hospitality industry, right? So they are really, really impacted, and they have no choice but to cut costs, rethink, retrench, and wait for things to improve. And the second camp that we've seen are what you term as people who are tactically reacting to what's going on. So we term these folks observers. And what they're doing is observing where the market's going, where the industry is going, where the customers are going, right? And making adjustments periodically to kind of react to that. So for example, we've seen software companies that are now moving more to the SaaS offering rather than the on-prem offering, right? So we've seen several examples where that's happening. So I think the key thing there is those tactical adjustments they're making, need to kind of align themselves to a more strategic direction. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But so we call them observers. And the third camp are what we would term as accelerators. So these are market leaders who are able to not just react to what's going on, but often take advantage of what's going on, right? So very interesting example was a healthcare client that we're working with who were catering to the providers, the provider space in healthcare. But now, given the lack of elective procedures, given what's going on, they've quickly shifted the focus to life sciences. And that requires both strategic thinking in terms of saying, hey, how do I pilot this? How do I figure out to play the long game here? But also quickly aligning all of their tactical and operational levers, to be able to go after that opportunity. So those are the three camps. Perfect. And in terms of the large number of people that we've spoken to and interviewed, we've seen about 68% of the folks are in the observe camp, 23% in the survive camp. There's only 9% of folks we spoke to who are trying to accelerate, which is very interesting.
Well said. So then, Chethan, I guess sort of moving through, as you think about, we talked to, I think between surveys and direct conversations and whatnot, there were over 1,300 CEOs in the past 6 months. And one of the big asks, if you will, and sort of stucks people dealt with was, I know I got to change, but it needs to be like something I can execute. It's got to be pragmatic. Mm-hmm. And the team has to be able to feel it's not pie in the sky. Like we're trying to survive and make a series of 90-day wins, keep going and keep going. So when you think about some of the way people are making their bets, choosing what to do, choosing efficiency over effectiveness, talk a little bit about that from the CEO's point of view, and even from the standpoint of all the work you've been doing around pricing and packaging, because that's had so much impact as people think about their current install base.
Absolutely, Matt. So I think in terms of what we've seen, CEOs have always been placing bets, right? So placing bets has not been, how do you call it? It's not a new thing, right? They've been placing bets all their lives and all their careers. But I think what's changed now is, what is the belief that you have in the marketplace before you place a bet, right? Mm-hmm. So understanding, again, and no one has a magic crystal ball to say this is exactly where the market's going to be. So the discussions that I've had with CEOs, it's really thinking about what is it that we believe in, right? Not just the CEO, but as a team, right? Yes. What do we believe in? Do we believe that we're going to go after a certain kind of customer with a certain kind of product, or are we not? Right. So that belief is probably one of the most important things. And that needs to be kind of, developed with a team. Right. So most CEOs do that, right? A bottom up thinking around, hey, what is it that we believe in? In terms of placing bets on those, based on those beliefs, what we see is these bets now need to be agile. Right. So, for example, you can say, hey, I'm going to go do this with my sales force today. Right. And a month down the road, let's say that plan's not working anymore, right? As long as your belief is still valid and you place the bet, you need to have that bet to be quite agile nowadays, right? So on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, quarterly business reviews are not, something new, but right now, the environment in which we live in, the way boards are asking, CEOs questions, it's become a monthly thing, right? Some of the CEOs we've spoken to in our forum have actually said it's almost a weekly thing, right? It's you need to have that level of agility in the bets that you've placed, and how do you kind of maneuver yourself to the uncertainty that's that's in front of us, right? So that's a big thing that we're seeing in terms of making those bets agile. And I think going back to what you're saying about planning, right? Revenue planning, that's something that is directly impacted by what we're talking about here in terms of agile bet, right? So what that means is, hey, on a almost as fast as you can, try and measure the right metrics that are driving your business. It may be win rates, it may be coverage, it may be your sales turnover, it may be customer retention, acquisition. So there's some very key metrics that we list in the report that we're discussing here. And it's really kind of making sure that you're measuring those metrics as often as you can, as quickly as you can, as accurately as you can, right? And then that kind of then drives your revenue planning thinking, where you're saying, hey, look, I'm going to monitor this on a monthly basis, but it's almost like a monthly update of a quarterly plan that you have, a rolling quarterly plan that you have. So that's what we're seeing. And this places a lot of emphasis on being able to get the right data, have people talk to each other, have the right reporting, right? You cannot wait for a report for 3 weeks when you're operating in this cadence in the present day. So I think that kind of also links back to how you need to set up some of these monitoring systems to make sure that the bets that you've placed are actually kind of going in the right direction.
So Chethan, one thing I want to share is, you think about the construct of efficiency, right? Maintaining a growth rate for less spend, right? Or effectiveness, right? Where people say, I need the current sales team to sell more. I want to drive bookings per head from $1 million per seller to 1.15, and that's what we're going to bet on. You and I have had lots of conversations where one isn't better than the other, but as a sales force and from a channel perspective, you've got to identify which play you're doing and why you're doing based on end markets. So this whole ability of reimagining the commercial engine after you reassess is important. Maybe talk about that in the construct of things like digital, of things like virtual selling, some of these trends that have now gone from being here to now overwhelming everybody. Share a little bit about that as it relates to 2021 planning.
Sure, absolutely, Matt. So in terms of what we've seen from an effectiveness and an efficiency perspective, the effectiveness element kind of goes into thinking about, hey, how has my market changed, right? So we've seen accelerators that we discussed earlier, like security example that I gave you. There's new opportunities out there in the marketplace, right? Whether you're kind of increasing your coverage or changing the geographic focus or vertical focus, right? So there's a lot of opportunity there in terms of how you can make what you do more effective, right? So the effective is essentially doing the right things, right?
Yep.
From an efficiency perspective, whether you think about cross-sell, upsell, reducing churn, etc. Again, those have kind of become table stakes, because if you cannot hold on to your customers in this environment, trust me, someone else will come in and take care of those customers, right?
Yep.
So I think there's both the efficiency play and the effectiveness play, which kind of relates back to what you're talking about, the big trends that we're seeing, right? I think I would kind of maybe focus on a couple here, given the time we have. One is really the one big trend we see is the digital revolution instead of evolution, right? Suddenly, everybody's pretty much forced to think about, hey, how do we kind of make digital at the forefront of what we do, rather than being an experiment in the back room, right?
Yep.
And that's kind of made a lot of changes across the spectrum of commercial levers we talk about. So I think a good example, like you picked up earlier, is pricing and packaging, right? We were speaking to, as you remember, one of the software CEOs who kind of deals with small and medium-sized businesses. What they've done is effectively to kind of ride along with the revolution. They've kind of enabled self-service models, right? They've enabled better demos. They've even enabled digital contracts and digital signing, so that you can kind of sign a software contract without having to wait 4 weeks, right? So just speeding that up, making sure that digital is at the forefront is a big trend that we're seeing, right? Especially when it comes to packaging and pricing. Right.
Yes.
So you're not going to go into this long, protracted negotiations anymore. You're kind of trying to be agile about it using digital means. So that's number one. I think the second thing that we're seeing, Matt, is just the transformation of buyer behavior and customer expectations. I think a great example there is one of a software company that kind of caters to the K-12 primary education sector. And for them, until now, their buyers were primarily the procurement people or a few teachers in schools, right? But suddenly now they're exposed to a completely different set of buying groups, which is the parents, right? Because the parents are enabling their kids to learn from home, and they're kind of coming face to face with the software that probably you would have never seen if your kids were at school and not at home, right? And how people kind of think about that, how you set those buyer expectations, has kind of changed very, very quickly, right? And what does that mean to the CEO agenda? It's really thinking about how do you not only understand the customer experience and the customer journey, but also understand the buyer experience and the buyer journey, right? Which may no longer be the same. So that has big implications in terms of the quality of that experience that you deliver.
Yes.
But also thinking about how do I kind of make sure that internally there are people who are responsible and working together to deliver customer experience and customer success in a seamless way, right? So that's the second trend. And the last but not least, which I think most clients have asked us about, I can't remember a single conversation where this has not come up, is virtual selling.
Yes.
Right. Suddenly, folks who are on the road, driving around, talking to people, are now required to do it via Zoom or GoToMeeting, whatever other software they use, and that presents challenges. So suddenly, your field sales is now inside sales, right? You don't have that personal touch, that discussions over dinner. So how do you kind of make that personalization or the personal experience that your customers were used to? How do you make that work virtually? And that's a big challenge, right? Again, this has risen up to the CEO agenda, because suddenly you need a different kind of sales enablement. You need a different kind of customer education to understand what they expect and how to deliver that. And ultimately, you also need the technology and the infrastructure, right?
Yes.
You can't have your Zoom calls crashing every 3 minutes and deliver a good customer experience. So I think those three, Matt, those three are trends that you're going to see pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
And as you well know, this has come up, in multiple different forums, whether it be talking to CEOs, talking to the CROs. These trends have surfaced often, and this is what people are trying to now deal with at the moment.
So, Chethan, knowing those three trends, and I guess on this last question, and then I know I got to let you run as you have other stuff to get done, is planning always has to, or should be, planning for a new year should be cross-functional. And pre-pandemic, we saw a very small percentage of people using, like a centralized PMO or something that you guys have taught me around the revenue growth office, right? Like bringing people together and like putting more rigor around running revenue growth on a day-to-day basis, not just doing like a project for 10 weeks and then you go back to normal. So maybe just sort of finish this segment for the CEOs around taking this pragmatic approach, the thought of a revenue growth office, and maybe how that would help them get closer to that accelerator camp and further away from that observer camp.
Sure, absolutely. So as we well know, even during the best of times, getting people to kind of work together is a very hard thing to do, right? Sales, marketing, finance, customer success, they're all kind of working towards the same objective, but they kind of dance to a different beat, right? And that's always a challenge. But in a pandemic like this, it becomes even more of a challenge, right? Because if you kind of get your listening posts working correctly, if you have your pricing not being set correctly, if you do not kind of pay attention to a new product launch that's coming up in an environment like this, disaster pretty much is guaranteed to ensue, right?
Sure.
So the revenue growth office that you mentioned is essentially a construct that we've used very, very successfully to bring together all of these functions in a very seamless way, but for the longer term, right? So like you said, it's not a one and done. So we don't have a revenue growth office today and we shut it down 4 weeks from now. Yep. But it's really kind of serves four purposes. One is, how do we mobilize what we need? How do we plan, together? So for example, if there's a new product launch coming up, how do we ensure that there's the right sales coverage for the product, the pricing is correct, financial business case is correct, right? So that's number two, the planning. Then agreeing on metrics and targets that everyone tracks together, talks about together, and react to changes together, right? And last but not least is really the value realization part, which is once we start executing to the plan, how do we kind of make sure that it's actually delivering results, whether it be improved win rates, whether it be improved revenue per rep? How do you kind of make sure that execution is actually happening? So this revenue growth office is a concept that we've tried, our construct more than a concept that we've tried in a lot of different organizations, and we believe in an environment, especially the environment in which people are in right now, this is going to be critical, right? To make sure that everyone's aligned and marching to the same drum beat in a very agile way, which is the key element here.
Great. Well, Chethan, always appreciate you sharing your insights. The market context is great for the audience watching. Chethan made me promise that I would complete all of the books behind him before speaking to me again. So I've done that, and after this show, I have a quiz with him. So I've got to get ready, and my palms are sweaty. I'm super nervous. But Chethan, always good to see you, brother. Thanks for coming on.
Likewise, Matt. Thank you. Take care.
So, audience, as you head off to go be pragmatic, because pragmatic is cool. And as you're heading into 2021, Chethan laid out some really good constructs for you to think through. Number one, you got to reassess your revenue growth strategy. That's one thing that Accelerators did. It's got to be built in a way that allows you to deal with disruptive change. Number two is, what commercial options are available to you? How can you reimagine where you place your bets? And then lastly, the revenue growth office. How does that cross-functional construct come together and stay together as you come out of planning for 21 and go into execution? As always, I wish you good luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on the studio, SBI's Executive Briefing Center, our team, or to schedule a workshop, please visit salesbenchmarkindex.com.